You are listening to the Apocalyptic Education podcast. I'm your host, Tiffani Marie, and a little later, the good Dr. Kenjus Watson will join me for our interview segment. Join us in a final farewell to schools in hopes that we might embrace its afterlife and implications for Black and other Indigenous frameworks of wellness. You ready, brother?
I'm ready.
Spirit, thank you for another day and opportunity to be present, to carry out our callings and to do it in community. And super grateful for Kenjus and our families that allow us to be together to engage in ceremony. Thank you for just meeting Kenjus and the amazing and powerful relationship that we have had over the course of these 6 years now. We just come calling in our powerful, benevolent ancestors to guide us, to hold us, to remind us of our beauty, and support us today in our reflection and the connection that we will make, the knowledges that we will create. We pray that this would be a blessing to those who listen. We pray that this would be a blessing to ourselves. And may we be intentional, slow, and loving in our offerings. Ashe.
Ashe. I want to call forth our ancestors into this space. We invite you to sit with us, to guide us, to inspire our remembrances and our sharing of wisdom and knowledge that is grounded in observations of many generations and transmitted through story, through word, through weather. We thank you for the opportunity to be in better relation with both you, with each other, with our families and communities, and with the future. And we ask you for continued blessing, for purpose, and for memory in the task that's before us. Ashe.
Ashe.
Yeah, Tiff, so it's wild because I think when we first met, we weren't doing that to begin our groundings or our connections. And I know probably at the beginning of this episode, we'll probably show the first time that we met, but it didn't necessarily begin with an overt invocation of the ancestors or prayers, but it was certainly, I think, underneath what we both were being guided towards and longing for at that time. And I'm wondering if we can just, in this space that we have together this morning, walk the sort of 7 generations path, if you will. So going back to where we were at the time of our engagement with what has become Apocalyptic Education and then sitting where we are in this current moment in Red Tone Studios, and then thinking a bit about where we're headed, where our children are headed, where the work or the Spirit's calling us.
I mean, we talk about it so much, so I'm trying to think of a different angle, because I always say this when my band is performing somewhere, and Justin makes fun of me for this, of having a different arrangements and all these changes, because I'm like, I got the same people coming and supporting me. I feel like that's the case with the podcast. I try to give them something new, you know? But I mean, you know, we were talking about this with our parents, which is in turn kind of why we're thinking about how we want to approach this episode today. Just a lot was happening. My grandma had just passed, and I was experiencing this space that I think most teachers get to at some point, if they're blessed enough to really reevaluate their practice. Was very bruised from my time in the academy. It was the beginnings of just, you know, and this is the thing that I don't talk about a lot, but my mentor at the time, who was this very celebrated academic at the top of his game, was having a complete breakdown, you know, and my dissertation had taken all types of turns that were devastatingly impacted by the way in which the academy was killing him. And as his student, to see someone who had kind of blown up and been elevated very quickly, fall very quickly, and the people around me who were supposedly his peers and colleagues making jokes about his demise, it was a really weird time, you know. It was a weird time where I felt like, you know, we got this language of telomeres, you know, and people were excited about that, more excited than Black children actually being healthier. They were excited about the science that explained that.
Yeah.
So I was rethinking a lot, was seeing these interesting things coming up in research, but also grieving deeply and feeling very burned by that mentor, being burned by the people who were neglecting him. And you know, and then we meet at the suggestion of some folks who had known us because of our research, you know. And, you know, when I met you, my first feeling was irritation. And that's kind of evident in the questions that I was asking you. It just felt so, what you were saying felt so academic. And did you know this?
I think so.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't tell from your facial expression. It just felt so academic, and I think the somatic reaction was a certain type of grief of like, and you were so smart. You were so smart.
Thanks. I needed that affirmation after the hit.
That's what irritated me though. You were so smart. And I was just like, oh my God, here we go again.
You mean like shades of your mentor or of other people in the academy?
I was seeing the semblances of how fragile this thing is that I had been taught my entire life to work for. And then I was hearing you describe the sacred, that which should be protected in what seemed like a very highbrow way. I know you now. Deeper than that, but it was just that, and it was clearly a projection, and it was clearly that doesn't mean there wasn't certain truths to it, but it was clearly a projection of like how tired I was of myself, and feeling incredibly inauthentic, but also being on to something, you know. So all of that was happening at that time. What was going on for you?
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, there's what was coming up for me while you were sharing were all these different entry points, because there's never one story of how we come to something. So I was thinking about, my goodness, that was 2018. I think like between 2016, 2015, maybe 14, around that time, as I was leading up to that period where we actually met each other, there was like suicidal ideation, not just for myself, but for most people closest to me.
Mm-hmm.
I remember talking to my dad about that. Like, what do you think it means that all these people don't want to be here? Graduate school had saw for me the dissolution of relationships. It had been a complete rewiring and rewriting of who I was. And at the same time, there was like this, it felt like a movement that I could join that was getting at something. You know, watching Black people get murdered every day overtly did something to me. And I wanted to do something about that. And then finding these different frameworks, ironically, out of the so-called academy, but even in activist spaces, we were, you know, being introduced to Afro-pessimism and, you know, the idea that anti-Blackness was the foundation of the world was really, it was something that I had felt to be true and had words for that aligned with like what my mentors had talked about as well. So it was at one point like a opening, but an opening into what? You know, we were imagining the end of the world at that point. And I wanted to contribute to that imagining because I felt the world that we lived in had nearly killed everyone that I loved, or nearly killed me. So when you found me, I think I was a bit nihilistic. So the idea that I was like invested is a really interesting mirror or reflection, because what we were, myself and Anthony and Johnny, trying to do even with that whole space was to, we thought of like imploding the very academy, you know, without knowing it and without knowing how to do it or having studied people who had tried it before. So I was really, when we first met, I was really excited to meet you because it was this other vantage point that I felt like I wasn't really allowed to access, and also hold my commitments to a desire to end or contribute to ending something, you know, and our connection, you know, had through SF State had talked about, oh, she's going, if you're about destroying, she's about building. That was like what was presented to me. So I was genuinely excited to meet you and hear your thoughts. So when your question first came to me, it was a bit confusing because in my mind, I was the furthest thing from trying to prove that racism existed. Maybe I was trying to get people, Black people, in the same way I learned from Danny Solorso and others, like Derek Bell was trying to get folks to, hey, if these aliens and space traders come, they're going to take you no matter what. I was trying to maybe prove to us that there was nothing here for us. And
there's definitely an element of convincing. Yes. Always.
Yes.
Still. Yeah.
Sure. I accept that. But I think that's also speaking to myself. And the this or that, either or, the dichotomization of things certainly was informing me. So I hear that idea about me being intellectual.
I mean, and that's one way to say it, right? Yeah. I think as I'm talking to you, I'm excited about this episode because I just feel like being hella real right now. I think what's underneath that was definitely an element of competition. And, oh, this guy is doing the same thing. So this subconscious feeling of needing to find holes in your argument. And then also there was this, you know, you had these locks, these shoulder length at that time, locks, and in some degree you were polished. And I think under that was that we could never be friends. And that part of me is just like, I'm going to go there. Part of me was just like, this guy is like would never be interested in being in community with me. I think that also, but that's feelings of insecurity, right? And thinking like, this guy, I think we all do this, but I had a vision of who you hung out with, the type of people you hang out with, the type of people you respect in my head, and I just was not that. So I think that those insecurities allowed for certain beliefs about what you were doing, the content, which I think is important because people just don't talk about this enough. And that I would never be loved by a person like that. I would never be in community. And so at best I can do what I'm good at, which is critiquing and finding. And I think that's a lens that I was looking through. So of course that's the question I asked. And I didn't come looking for, I came looking to, it's like in battle mode of like,
sure,
which pieces do I need to take from him? Which pieces, what makes his argument better or stronger than, because of the comparison. And so you were telling me that you you had a similar kind of feeling of when we actually were like, well, let's start working together.
Just blew my mind. Because, well, especially at that time, there was like, oh, you remember that piece? This happened a couple times in grad school. That there was a piece that came out shortly before that, the time of meeting you. It was a really powerful piece, Plantation Politics. Dancy, these folks. It was incredible to me. And
Edwards III or something.
Yeah. But it was incredible. And I remember sending it to like Tyrone Howard, who was a mentor at the time, being like, this is everything I've like wanted to say. What else is there even to, because the academy teaches us that feelings and remembrances about truth are property. And once someone puts their, as Anthony would say, like claim, land claim in it, they've settled there, move on. Similar to like the first time I saw a Telomere article that had, I think it was David Shea, did like some stuff up in San Francisco. But I remember my mentors being like, but it's okay because no one else in education has done this, And I think Danny had told me he was up in the Bay and had heard, have you heard from, it's a black woman. She's doing telomeres. And I'm like, Danny, that's not good. That's scary, man. I have to get a job. What will it mean if one someone other gets there first? Yeah. Just wild shit like that. So, but I wasn't interested in that kind of competition at that time. I think that's like why we wanted to do a non-defense. We thought the idea of defending the love and community that had sustained us through the process and the stories that we got from these people who were sharing. Who are we defending that from? I guess it was the committee, but like, we didn't know that. Maybe some committee members weren't happy about that, but like, so like you asked that question that night and I was very serious about what I said. I thought about what if we could look at, because I still was in the mode of Western science is necessary to communicate to anybody. Yeah. What if we could prove that loving each other unconditionally, which is how Letty had framed her study, loving each other unconditionally could heal us. If we could prove that and then build in the garden school, we said with Anthony, that would be that's the work I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But we met and then you like took off, right? And I fully expected that your work was doing things that my work could never do. So in many ways, it's like the same. Mm-hmm. I remember doing talks at the time about the work I was doing and people being so enamored with the idea that, racism could kill you. What a novel idea.
Yeah. Because you have this.
Because we have.
Western scientific
Because
approach.
Black people have been lying.
Yes.
We just don't believe it.
Yeah.
Or we die from all these diseases and, people who are incarcerated for decades come out and have life expectancies for less than a decade after that because something's wrong with them.
Yes.
Right. That was and so it just seems so wild to me that was even a thing. Mm-hmm. And I remember starting to, I would say like, here's here's the new thing, right? Like, I think I called it on a slide. I'll have to pull it up at some point for you. It was like Tiffany Marie's breakthrough, you know? And I had like, my stuff was all about these telomeres eroding.
Yes.
And then yours was like this green. Mine was literally red and yours was green.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I was presenting it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was insecurity.
Mm.
And that I didn't think about that. I didn't think of a longitudinal. I didn't, you know? And so when you called and said, what's up? I thought it was like to almost like rub it in my face because that's what I was used to. You know, like,
wow,
you're not there.
Yeah.
And you said, I'm just trying to figure out, I don't know if this was in person or what, but you're like, I'm just trying to figure out why we haven't started working together yet. And I was like, wait, what? What do you mean? So you don't even know. It was a lighthouse. You were a lighthouse for me at that time. Things were not good in a lot of different ways. And so it provided me a buoy to hold on to. Even as like I was hearing from people in my study who we saw like they could be healing. There was something really powerful about being invited to focus on healing for the next few years that I'm forever grateful for. Because I think the other, not so much the other path, but sitting with the everyday realities of Black death, it is overwhelming. And it is necessary, as we're talking about for death work. It is an important and sacred practice. And I appreciate the ways I was invited to do that. But I also think, as we've heard in other conversations, the balance.
Yes.
And also different cosmology.
Yeah.
Death is not even an end, but it is a portal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in some ways our work has kind of, in our relationship as we've drawn closer, has mirrored or followed that portal.
Yeah. For sure. I can't even think of like, we always talk about how there has literally not been a week that we've not spoken to each other since 2018.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, it used to be like legit every day or every other day. And I'm sitting and figuring out like, so our partners were just like, what is happening right now? Who is this person? But I'm trying to think of what, and some of that is blurry. And of course, I'm going to make up what was really happening there. But I'm thinking about like, how did it go? I remember the call in talking to you about Edwidge Dandicat and talking about school being the dead baby. I remember the sound that you made on the phone. That's very clear. I don't remember how we got to agreeing to write a piece. That must have been you.
You were invited to write a piece. And it was the first time I'd heard about that, right? That even happened. You were invited to write a piece. And I thought we were going to write about our dissertation data. And you had been invited essentially to submit something to a journal, which meant it was almost like, oh, we could maybe get a guaranteed pub here. And I'm like, okay, I was trained. Let me start, figuring out which piece of the data from the dissertation will go into this and then laying out this very conventional trajectory, even while my feelings about the academy and about existing in it were like bringing me down to the ground.
Yeah.
Right. But I was, all right, let's do it. And you were like, no, let's write about apocalyptic ed. And that was so exciting to me that would be the first thing I say. Maybe the last thing.
maybe the last.
Right. So when you talked about the dead baby, I'd never heard of Edwidge Dandicat, and I went and got the book and started looking for the moment when she said she was, that part, like she was perfuming the baby, the stench of the baby.
Yes.
But it wasn't.
Which is not in there.
I was outlining at a conference and I'm like, I read the whole piece. Where is it?
It's a different chapter. It's a different story.
Yeah.
But my brain merged them. It
was what needed to be brought forth.
Oh, yeah. We always, we talk about Toni Morrison's idea of memory. It's not what happened, What
was so wild for me at that time is I was writing, we were going to ceremony, right? And my daughter was strapped to my chest. So I was writing in between her naps. Whereas she would nap, I would write. And then she'd wake up and I'd feed her. and like we walk around, but she still was on my chest. And eventually she'd like go back down and I'd be writing about dead babies.
Oh
It
God.
was very,
Wow.
very us.
Agreed. I think it's important for listeners to know our process behind writing that piece, which I don't know if we've ever talked about publicly.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is memory, so I'll share what I remember. And then I know that we kept having these epiphanies. We kept talking, and we're just like, oh my God, we got to put that in the paper. But we were in agreement, and I that was not my thing at the time. Like, I had done mindfulness practice with children, with myself, but prayer and that type of grounding was just not not in the way that we were engaging. And at one point, something was happening, and we were on the phone, and you were like, "Well, I'll just do some Reiki with you right now." And I was like, "What? What?" But I had already trusted you, and we were only like months in, and I had trusted you, where I was in my classroom, and you sent energy my way, and I received it, and I was like, "Well, okay, this is what we're doing. I don't know what is happening, who this person is, but I feel it. And I feel him." So we had agreed that we were going to be really intentional. And from my memory, we would go into ceremony. I'm in Oakland. You're in Southern California at the time, right? We would go into ceremony every day at the same time, right? And then write. And then we would come back and share what's the spirit realm conveyed to us, and then build off of that. Right?
As we were taught,
As we were taught in...
I remember that in second grade. How do you construct a thesis?
Yes. Go into prayer.
Sure.
Call in your ancestors. Listen deeply to them. And then write a 5-paragraph essay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a lot. And everything went in there. Yeah. I think everything that ever we heard. Because there was a whole lot of discernment. And then... If y'all have ever read AE, which is 902 pages, hopefully this adds some context. Yeah, why? But I just remember us being, and it was like very hip hop to me. I would like see what you wrote, and I'm like, okay. I'm gonna go back, and I just knew my sections because I felt like you were such a stronger writer. And I would read your passages, and I'd just be like, oh, I had to go back. But your writing is the reason why I remember to try to meet what I thought you were doing, what I felt you were doing, which was this beautiful weaving. You've always beautifully weaved the sort of sacred, I feel like it's very Toni Morrison approach to, I don't even know this is how she approached it, but this is what I feel when I've read her. There's you're obviously a songwriter, but there's a lyricism to your writing, and there's also like a construction of a song. There's like returns to certain points, and like beautiful writing. And I feel so mechanical at times, or felt at that time, especially in robotic. That the reflection was something I did that's for dialogue work. That's for letters to people, right? But that's not for this thing. Yeah. And you were doing this beautiful lyric around, the Cillian and her baby. And I thought, this is a funeral. Yeah. And you would framed it as such, but we really should make it a funeral. Yeah. And I tried my best to reach back into my like creative space that had in some ways like atrophied, and tried to remember what it was like to go to people's rites of passage or celebrations of life and remember the different pieces and components. And that was like my attempt to respond to what you'd already done. So it's intense because it takes me back to my writing in general, right? Right. Right. You know what I'm saying? Right.
What's the right count? I think that's the first time I've said right this entire podcast.
No, you said it every time. I was joking.
We make jokes about the academics who say right at the end of every phrase.
You know what I'm saying? Right.
Right? I mean, just think about schooling and the trajectory of it, of like recommended for special education in third grade.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then having these really, so that being a really pivotal point of not being good enough, of needing accommodations, of what I bring being a deficit. And then having these weird experiences of like being celebrated, being an honor roll student after that, getting accepted to Berkeley, and then not passing the writing requirement and having to take college writing, R1A, and failing it, which I tell people I failed it. That was a 6-unit class that I failed, which means, I don't know if people know, but units correlate with hours. Had to do that again. And, you know, trying to learn this thing that other people were doing in this particular way, being mentored in that. And feeling like I kind of got it, graduating, and that meaning something to people, you know. And then getting to graduate school and Jeff, I meet Jeff, he's my mentor. And I remember my master's thesis, he would be reading it and I'd be at the table with him and he would cross out entire pages. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with that? Because I'm thinking the page count, entire pages. And he kind of continued in that and would like find these spots. Like, that's it. But I really didn't log that. And when I was, when I went back for my PhD, and he was still mentoring me at that time, I got like a B on my first paper. And you know what a B is in a doc program. That's the equivalent of an F. And I worked so hard to sound like everybody else. And I did it. I got my A. Eventually that semester, and I'm so proud, sent it to Jeff, and he was just like, your grandmother, how would she feel about this?
Yeah.
And I was like, come on, I finally made it. Like, I'm finally being accepted in these spaces. And that stuck with me. So when I did my dissertation, it was the funnest writing that I had done probably in my entire schooling career. And it was all narrative, all story. And I remember, and his opinion was very important to me at that time.
Yeah.
And I remember sending him that first chapter that I put and it was just like, for my dissertation, I set a goal of writing a page a day. And I would, for a month, then I'd get my chapter, it'd be about 30 pages.
Yeah.
And then I'd revise a page a day.
Yeah.
So it'd take me 2 months per chapter. And then I'd send that off. This is before chat. This is before, right? So I was really spending all this time. And I sent it to him and I'm like waiting for, how he's going to tear this apart. And he was just like, fucking beautiful. And it meant so much to me. It meant so much, not just because he said it, but because I knew it. I knew it. So by the time we met and were engaging, I was like, oh, I know where I fit in here. And I know that this is my thing. I don't care if everybody else does. This is my thing. So it felt great, but I still felt intimidated by your writing. And that might have been, I don't know, trauma.
I think that your story of both this beautiful artistry that you bring to, I remember seeing a meme like, we're putting ink onto these dead trees and just tripping out, like that's what writing is. You're just looking at people inscribe their imagination onto deadened trees and
captured.
And then you're hallucinating. Of course you are, right? You're that was a ceremony, but I think like as you describe it, it's reminding me of how much the road to a terminal degree is littered with parts that of people that have been cut down from the earliest. And here we are, but there are so many other children who, when they were, recommended for special education, that led to a different trajectory. And then those, either we resist the responses to that trajectory and say, this is bullshit, or it becomes a very like defining characteristic. And I think it's, the celebration is like celebrating someone who's made it through a gauntlet. But why are we, it still does not, I would never want my children to experience that.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to. And I myself have been through it and think, like, literally was getting my ass beat at times in these school spaces. And then, like, to your point, have had mentors or tormentors even.
Ooh.
That's a solorcinal frame, right? Like, you have a mentor or tormentor who everything they said meant everything.
Yes.
Because they almost held my worth and value in their words.
Yeah.
And that's not good witchcraft. That's a terrible spell or craft that we are put under, adults.
Yeah.
And then we turn and do it to others. And I remember being told I got to be in grad school by a now well-known scholar. And I was told that I had to get all A's in order to get into a PhD program. So I was very committed and was like killing myself to do it. I got this B for not putting a period in the bibliography where it was supposed to go. And I didn't cross the T in another point, literally. Edge. The scholar was like, look, I'm just trying to prepare you for the next stage, baby. Like in a very loving, it's a Black scholar kind of way. And I just couldn't wrap my head around it. I wanted to just be told, this is how they'll come at you.
Yeah.
But so much of our practices of survival we've talked about as a people have been about preparing our young people for a world that wants to kill them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like microdosing poison so that we can build up the internal immunity so that you can survive when they douse you in toxicity, And I want there to be another way that's mass at scale for us that doesn't require that. I don't know. That's what your story brings to mind.
Yeah, of course. And I, and all those things are coming forward as we're writing and attempting. And so that was your idea to frame it as a funeral.
Mm-hmm. Well, your idea to hold a funeral. I think that you inspired the idea for me to literally make the paper
a funeral. Yeah.
And not a paper that describes how we should have a funeral and need a funeral.
Yes, but to actually create space for that.
Yeah, but you'd already done that with the silly. You'd already written essentially a eulogy.
Yeah. No, I feel you. I'm just, what comes to me is the really cute naivete of like, we about to blow this field open with this one.
Yeah,
it's cute. It's very cute. Of like, man, we gonna get them with this one, But it speaks also back to the those who have been stepped on. Are like, in some ways, it was still very much in conversation with our abusers. Of like, yeah, we're going to get them with this one, but it's still like they're going to notice us now. They're going to understand the power of our work and our thinking. And also like, we're about to mess some stuff up. And that felt really good. But I think that was the like,
energy.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get them with this one.
So how would you do it differently now? If we were to sit today, we're not trying to go there yet.
Well, I was going to talk about the fact, like the submitting process.
Okay. We're going to talk about that here. We're going to do it. I guess so. Let's go.
I mean, you don't want to?
No, I'm cool with it. I'm thinking. I'm just thinking. Let's go. Let logic put logic to rest for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's what came to me. I'm down to talk about.
No, if it can't.
That's a part of the process. We've been protecting everybody else. We can protect these people too and still talk about what happened to us.
It's true.
You know, we had this journal that we were super excited about. We had this fire piece. We're crying when we're reading our work. We're like, our partners are like, oh, my, like, wow. My mama.
Mm-hmm.
And we send this to these people, this draft. And they just were not feeling it at all. It didn't make any sense to them, largely.
Mm-hmm. What's the contribution beyond the Sankofian method?
Yeah.
Like Sankofi, there's a Sankofian, okay.
Yeah.
We didn't put that in there.
We didn't put that in there.
Yeah, but
after all of this, I mean, you wrote this extensive, what would traditionally be seen as a lit review or a theoretical framework, extensive on this harm that we have experienced through our schooling. Brilliant, groundbreaking methodology to even approach it. I've never read anything like what we did and put in that piece. And folks were just like, what do we do with this? Which I actually, now that I'm mature, I love that. Where would you put that? You know, I think that's amazing. But there was a very much they gutted our piece, sent it back. I don't even remember. It was like countless edits, countless.
Yeah, it would have been which we know from folks we're in connection with now, right? Like some people's pieces are 3 years in the writing and the making.
Man.
So it would have been easily another year.
And become what at the end of that?
Yeah.
You know, like what would it have looked like at the end? But we did multiple rounds of edits. And I remember getting this was all 2019, getting one of those last ones back. And we were just like, what are we supposed to, you know?
Yeah.
And I think we had taken a break. We didn't reply. We didn't respond to them. And the pandemic hit. 2020. It was some time, I feel like. And we got an email like the next week, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the timing. But
I'm going to go back. I bet you it's the third week of March that we got an email back.
Yeah.
I would bet.
Yeah.
It was definitely after shelter in place.
Yeah. Well, I remember seeing aspects of the work start popping up.
Oh.
I remember seeing pieces of it.
Pieces of the article show up in other people's articles.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was wild.
Yeah. But we actually
magically now think this is pretty much almost ready to go. We've gone ahead and edited it for you. And here's the version. And it didn't have all the teeth.
Yep.
Gone.
Yep.
And they were serious, straight face about that. And so we pulled it. And we were not professors.
Right. Well, with tenure track positions.
Yeah. We were not tenure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We were not assistant professors at the time.
No.
And we pulled the article, made the decision to pull it and, move in another direction. Right. But I want to get back to what you were saying. I just thought that was an important component.
I think that is important because it frames why go with a community-based journal? Why engage Black community spaces or sacred spaces?
And just legitimacy that I can't put my ideas out there without.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was, but to me, I felt like within the piece was already, I don't know, I thought that I would probably go and build Adobe homes afterwards anyway. So I was in a early apprenticeship program for plumbing at the time. So I was doing a postdoc, but also was apprenticing to be a plumber.
Yep.
And thought, perfect, period.
Yes.
And I think you've talked about putting question marks at the end today where you would have put periods.
Yeah, or exclamation points.
Or exclamation points, but different pronunciation. Because to me, I thought what we had done is we had pronounced the very project and idea of this as dead.
Yes.
And to your point about like being critical, I thought it was a finger pointing.
Mm-hmm.
And if not at people that I didn't know, it was at people that I did know, like those tormentors.
Yes.
And it was a get back.
Yeah.
You know, it was like I got expelled in first grade because Dr. David Just wanted to beat me with the paddle, and I got expelled because I punched his legs. I mean, I was at height, like I was at his knees.
Yeah.
And I punched him with all my might, you know? He expelled me for punching him, right?
We hit you, you don't hit us.
Right. And I felt like AE for me was another one of those moments. It was an attempt to punch the legs of this monstrosity.
Yeah.
And these people who had been possessed by it.
Yeah.
And not seeing myself as necessarily still in possession of that harm.
Yeah.
But I think the energy behind it was very counter.
Yeah.
And accusatory. And coming from a place of still being in harm. Academy and not, you know, like anybody.
Well, I mean, we had this excitement.
Yeah.
Because we were just so sure what this was going to do to the fields, to our communities.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the reception was of the article?
I don't know. I think that's difficult to say because we were also sheltering in place. I remember presenting in Iraq and like we invited certain people because it seemed like it was in definitive conversation with David Stovall and school abolition. Yeah. And it to a certain extent it was, and it was kind of like what was happening, and the world seemed to be mirroring.
Yes.
And you know, but you always say people thought we wrote that at the beginning of Shelter in Place.
Yes.
Like we wrote this a year before. So I think there was probably like, are we riding a wave of disaster? But maybe also a lack of acceptance of it. And then what do you? I think just like Ernest Hardy always says, anytime Black people name a problem, then the world is like, what's your solution, nigga?
Yeah.
Like, what do you don't talk without fixing it for us. And I felt there was some of that inherent in it too.
I felt that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I felt I felt that a lot. And it was intense to experience that because I think we went to a certain place of here are some examples of how we could move. So we actually did that, even though I don't even necessarily believe in that anymore, but we did it. And so I didn't have the lived experience or the groundedness to even know how to respond to that, except to be disappointed. But I'm not there today. You know, I think I have more critique of us, but also with grace. Not even critique, just learning and wisdom from how I would do it differently. So that's what I'm sitting with is, as a death doula. And that's what's really intense and hard to say, because we used in a lot of ways, engaged death work, death care, as symbolically through that piece. And at some point years later, it hit me of like, oh, I'm being called into this work quite literally, even though whatever, right? Being called into this. And when I was receiving training, Elua said, because a lot of people at the end of the training were like, where's our certificate? Or like, how do we show people that we went through this and that? Like, at what point do we become death doulas? And she was she was saying, you were a death doula before you came here. Like the work that y'all are doing, the work that y'all have been doing. And she was like, and she gestures, I now crown you death doula, right? Because we need that. Mm-hmm. We need those people, those systems to make legitimate what we have been called to do our entire lives and what we have been doing. And I see that very much in the paper and kind of our moves around. It was still this need to be invited and accepted to live out our sacred purpose. And now I know, just like, yeah, we didn't need to do all that. We didn't even need to put all of what we put in that paper. It was so much there. But I think what came up and what comes up in conversations with folk in resistance to the peace is what comes up in most aspects of life is a deep fear of death. And we not only, pull the rug is such a mediocre way of saying what that did.
Mm-hmm.
You are not engaging one of the greatest fears that people have in ever, dying. Yeah. And you're going to couple that with the very system that has added legitimacy to their lives, to their understanding of who they are. And we're saying, we're putting both of that in the same article.
Yeah.
So there's a level of naivete, I think, and expecting people to just jump on it and like get with it, and just in the little time that I've had taking very seriously the work of death care, I understand that it requires so much more slowness and grace and love and deep connection, around doing it. And I think that's one of the larger, it's not a critique, but that's something that I'm carrying today about how I would do it differently, or how I plan to teach the article now. Yeah. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I think that we tried to attend to some of that with the story of Cillian and her baby.
Yeah.
I don't know that we sat with Cillian's choice.
Mm-mm.
I think we were critical, understanding but critical.
Yeah,
of
there was
the
some
desire
judgment
to hold on.
Yep. Yes.
And death and grief are these they're framed in our society as these like individual processes for each person.
You're speaking.
But they are, in fact, very communal.
Yeah. Yep.
We live in a world. Our conversation recently, Amber was talking about how she experienced a lot of fire as a young person.
Mm-hmm.
And then like Dagara medicine and Dagara, the people from Burkina Faso and, Malidoma Some and Sambufu Some or some of the teachers offers this medicine that like fire is the energy. It's the primordial energy of youth. And so when young people, I guess, get to a place in their village where it's very clear they're like in need of initiation or rites of passage, the elders will say, we need to bring this young person through rites of passage or initiation, or they will return to their nature, which is fire. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They're full of fire, and if we don't initiate, they will burn up. And we live in a society that I feel like this world, if we could peg it with any energy, it's so much fire, so much almost combustion that is indicative of a inability and a lack of desire, outright fear and running from its own mortality, its necessary moves away from the current space that it's in. And grief and mourning and death are like, basically, I think we can't approach those from an individual standpoint because we live in a world that is so fearful of the very practice and process of grief and mourning and death that we are, in a sense, all wrapped up in a very similar energy. And I imagine approaching my nephew, who I think went through something like that, a lot of fire, and being like judgmental of him for not wanting to move through this portal, or my niece or myself. I would never do that to myself. But I feel like I did that in some ways in that article to educators, to scholars, to other people I love and care for, this assumption that you must be ready
Yep.
for death. I would never do that to someone who's grieving. In practice,
Yeah.
I would never approach, like, I remember when my grandfather passed and my grandma was doing something that she'd never done. And it was like, Grandma Betty's drinking tonight? What's going on? No one was like, what are you doing? Stop numbing. Stop. This is happening. Would never do that. So I think that there was some of that energy behind what I was thinking about in that space, because I was in pain.
Yeah.
And wanting people to join. And I think that in retrospect, what I would do differently is invite, as you said, like a slower process of what it actually means for this pathway that we've been taught and told is a very alive pathway. What if it were not?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that it's dying, but it's been dead for a long time.
Yeah.
That's wild. And I think that's, whether it's voting or anything else, like the engagement with this place won't render what we think it will. That is so, it's so life altering.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that I offered enough grace
Yep.
around what that meant for myself or for other people.
Yeah.
Clearly, because I have a job in academia.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not like there's this, the self-righteousness was, even the tinges of it needed. I think I would try my best to let go of those.
Yeah.
And give space for the ways that I needed to mourn about it myself.
Yeah. It's real. I mean, I was telling you about in my training, there's this documentary about these doctors who work with, I think they were terminal cancer patients.
Mm-hmm.
And is a husband and wife pairing, and the husband has stage 4 cancer. And so the documentary is just kind of watching his transition, right? Watching him die. And, it starts where he's able to talk and he's, sharing. And I do remember this oh my God, one of the grounding pieces. The interviewer is, saying, like, I can't believe you want us to be a part of this. And he says, film everything. And it's in Japan. So there's deep reverence for ways of life and engaging with one another. And the interviewer and director, is like, thank you for your story. And he says, thank you for listening to me.
Mm-hmm.
It is the highest honor.
Mm.
Man, so much in my life that needs to shift. But so you're watching this brilliant, beautiful, powerful man, and his wife is this incredibly strong, amazing leader in the ward that they're working in. And, they go to their weekly meetings with those who are in relationship with cancer. And you start to see his decline. And his wife, she's seemingly fine. Like, here's your medicine. They're joking, and he's cold, gets him a jacket. And they have an agreement that when he gets to a place where the pain is unbearable, that he will transition out through like a sedative, like being asleep for his last days. And he gets to a point where he's like begging. And she's like, nah, not yet. Not even like, just not yet. It doesn't seem, she's telling him, right? Looking at him, it's like, no, I think you're okay. And he begs and he begs and he gets to a point where she sedates him and he's out. And she starts missing him. And she takes him out of that state because she's not ready to let go. And I initially in the room, there was people's judgment of that decision. I could hear it, and I had the same one. But then it hit me that you can actually have a deep relationship with death. Like, they saw people transition. They saw people die a lot.
Yeah.
They saw people in probably some of the most ugly circumstances die. And they knew in many ways what they were getting themselves into.
Yeah.
And it was in the documentary it's called An Honest Death. It's like you can know and you can have the theoretical and practical understanding of this thing, but when you are faced with it, no one knows how we will respond, And it was incredibly humbling to me in thinking about this work of like, how dare us have a critique of people's confrontation with death,
Yeah.
How dare, and the grace that comes in what I was understanding and hearing you and kind of these initial learnings. It's like, no one is born alone, no one dies alone. And some people quite literally die and no one's around, but your death is never an individual thing.
Mm-mm.
The engagement of death is never a two-person thing.
Mm-mm.
Right? The implications of it, the impact of it, right, are immense. And that, to me, I did not have those lived experiences at that time. I didn't lose the pivotal people who I would lose that year in 2020.
Yeah.
Daniel was going to die.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have, Uncle Lewis was going to die. You know what I mean? Jaquez was going to die. And I didn't have those. I had stood in front of several children's bodies and caskets and still didn't have that framing that I have today in this seat of, and I don't, I keep calling it naivete because what I know now in a piece, and I don't even know if it belongs, if that is where it would be, but the sacredness and the challenge and the ugliness and the difficulty and the messiness of that, of what death illuminates, I don't even know if I would play with that in an article. I don't know. This feels realer and more appropriate.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know if I would put that on a dead tree.
Maybe not in that way.
Definitely not in that way.
Yeah.
What would you do if you were to put it in an article?
I think it's like akin to, our people being hung from trees. So we have this relationship that also hasn't really been adjudicated between the relationship quite literally with paper and death. Which I know my mom has talked about paper and Black people, paper and death. It's like trees and us have this relationship. And I think on the other side of this portal, we have experienced 1 million plus people die from COVID, which I see as very state manufactured.
It's in the top 3 causes of death now.
Yeah, still dying.
Yeah,
and the people that I've lost in the last few years did not happen during 2020. Of course, we know our communities were disproportionately impacted by death, and all throughout 20 and eventually 2021.
Yes,
then you start losing people in 2022. So the idea that COVID is done when I'm still losing people in 22 and 23 doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not the only one. We're on an ongoing genocide and experiencing mass death in multiple places, genocides in multiple places in the world. And there's the slowdown for that is really being held by communities who, whether they have a specific relationship with death or are doing whatever they can do to call this out as it's occurring, this mass murdering and deadening and dying of a people, undergird with what are they calling this, the 6th mass extinction.
Mm-hmm.
So many other relatives on this home that we share have been killed. And not, I think, in a way similar to what we were saying about school, not in a way that is emanating from a way of revering life and death. These are born of, as we said, a fear of death.
Yes.
A disdain for death.
Yeah.
An attempt, I saw a shirt said live fast, never die.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So we are in this.
Yes.
Born at this time.
Mm-hmm.
experiencing what we experience collectively as a cohort.
Yes.
I don't know for certain if this has happened in the same way before. It feels unprecedented. 15 million of African people at the bottom of the ocean, over the time period, or maybe in the Sahara with the Arabs trade, those certainly feel like life altering. I don't think the population in Africa increased during the times when everyone else did because of what's happened there for the past 3,000 years. But this feels different. And I think that I would approach it with a reverence for what it means to live during a time of great dying.
Mm-hmm.
And not an honorable or like a reveratory dying, but like a time of mass death. Excessive.
Well, the argument is that because there's not a revering of death,
yes,
then it leads to the excessive.
Yes.
And that people approach life in that way.
Yes.
I feel like the holding on of the wisest people suggest that you continue to know nothing, right? Because, this is just, knowing does not allow space for creativity.
Yeah.
Right? But the thing that I feel very connected to about the piece that we put out and what I hold on to, which feels incredibly ancestral and spiritual, is the remembering.
Yes.
And the returning.
Yes.
And that resonates deeply because it was after this work that we, what did the piece and the theory open us to? Birth work. Mm-hmm. And now death work. In very intentional ways, right? Mm-hmm. We get contracts, right? Let's be real, that invite us into certain spaces that felt incredibly inappropriate, but we get contracts and invitations from Apocalyptic Ed under the umbrella of Apocalyptic Education that invite us into the birth world, where we were doing that in our personal lives, but we start getting to work with people and families who have returned to these practices of home birthing, who understand the power, the ways in which the sacred can inform a fundamentally different understanding and practicing of life. Mm-hmm. And we get invited, into, as we are moving into intentional reverence toward dying and death, mm-hmm. that also fundamentally alter how we live and mm-hmm. how we engage. Mm-hmm. And so that part feels, and if it took all of that to say that, Ashe, I'm here for it.
Yeah.
Because where we are, I have such an excitement, and I think that's mind-boggling to certain people, of how you can talk about dying and death and devastation in the ways that we do, and also I have an immense excitement for life.
Yeah. That's the in-between, right?
Yeah.
You say life, death, and in-between.
Yeah.
Or home healing and education. This is education.
Yeah.
We get to do education. And if we're already in what people call fascism, and we're already in what we understand to be a collapse, then to me that does open up opportunities to return to ways that life has operated amidst what Earth is teaching us mm-hmm. about the medicine of what happens when there's an imbalance. Mm. So we're called towards balance. Mm. And we are representatives or avatars of living. And we also are, as we called into this space, supported and held by those who have died.
Yeah.
And we go round and round, so I'm looking forward to the journey continuing and opening. And I don't know if we do this again. In one piece we've constructed, who knows if it'll come out, especially after this one. We said, I think the question of the reviewers were like, why?
It's just like, why y'all still submitting this stuff to these people?
Why articulate your work with drums and with a cipher and with music?
Yeah.
And I think we said, like, we'll put words on paper this time, but next time it might probably just be drums.
Yeah.
Just get ready. So I'm excited for the openings and also for what might need to die as we continue going forward into honoring that. So I want to offer gratitude to you, Tiffani, for the invitation into
that's
this
what
work.
I was gonna say.
And offer thanks for the people who have helped to shape you, your mom, your family, your children, your child, your partner. I say children, but your partner, and your spirit for the invitation to partner around this and to show kinship. Just quickly, like the idea of sippy or shipmate, and why we call brother and sister. I think that's from our people in Suriname who were taken, but they had a word of shippy, which is like, I came over on the ship with you.
Yeah.
And it just meant that whatever relationships emerged after that passage, there was acknowledgement of who your people were that went through that.
Yes.
And so I feel like in many ways, you are my shippy, you're my sister as we've come through this time in life.
Yeah.
And I know that what moves forward or what develops will be what it needs to be to sustain the lessons from that movement on that passage.
Yeah, Ashe. I mean, that's what I wanted to say. Like deep gratitude to you and who you have consistently been. That is the part that's very powerful. You've been consistent, and it's been a foundation when other things have been incredibly rocky and unpredictable. And it just speaks wonders to who you come from. I can only imagine those Africans that you come from and what they were doing.
Same.
And how they were existing, in that you are here. And through all of it, and I know so much about your life. You be sending me pictures and stuff of your past life.
Hey now,
Lord.
Calm down.
And those Africans and whoever they were prior to being Africans, that energy and that spirit survived, and it is evident through you. And so thank you to them, and thank you to you.
Ashe.
Ashe. We out. This podcast was brought to you by the Apocalyptic Education Network and the Institute for Regenerative Futures. It was filmed and recorded at Red Tone Records. Continue the conversation with me and Kenjus at apocalypticeducation.org.
Mommy?
Yes, Buddha.
We're all done.
Yeah, we're all done.